Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is Governance is Functions, Why Your AI Won't Scale Without Discipline by Design. I'm joined by Chris Morancie, Fractional CTO and founder of Digital Operations Factory. Chris, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
So just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you have a really interesting background, from computer information systems, MBA in business strategy, now you're working towards data science, and you built workforce development programs, digital operations factory, fractional CTO, helping companies get AI in production. So, interesting path. And so how did that unfold for you? And, just tell us a little bit about kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Caribbean. I grew up in a really, poor family. And my dad dropped out of school at 12, got into business and, had uncles and aunts. They got into business, and business is what got us out of poverty. So I kind of grew up kind of going like, business is what actually does it, right? Yeah, I mean, no disrespect to anyone, but it's maybe not 9 to 5 most of the time. It's going to be, you're going to launch something, you're going to do business. So I kind of followed in the family path, which is kind of like really natural to just be in business. But I kind of like, became a little black sheep because I love tech at that time, right? It's the early 90s. I was born in 81. So early 90s, computers out. I'm like, I want to get into tech, right? So really got into that. Did my bachelor's in computer information systems, but again, at heart, entrepreneur, because just grew up in that environment. So one of the really interesting things I understand from a really, really early age that it's just tools. Everything around you is just a tool, right? So, computers, information systems, right? AI, right now, AI, just a tool, right? So I've really always kind of kept this lens that it's all about the business. It's all about doing things for value. And it's all about what is the best tool to kind of get you that value. And that's kind of like how I operate from. So I purposely did this, right? Bachelor's in computer information systems, went back and did my MBA, went back and worked my master's in data science. And throughout my career, I've always done like dual paths, right? I've always had one thing business related going on in terms of my learning and my practicing, and one part that's always been technical. And call it preparation, call it luck, but I believe now that we're in 2026, it's the age of the builder now, where you can combine technical with business and you can compress those two sort of like roles that used to be so dissimilar, and it works out really, really well. So, again, I would like to say it's been a purposeful path, but it's almost like it's been a calling. I think I've been made for this time.
I mean, in the end, it's certainly better to be lucky, right? So either way,
yes,
it's
lucky than good.
Better be lucky than good. So I know you're in the middle of writing what you've called the definitive AI in production framework, and one of the design decisions you made was that scalability shouldn't be standalone in the framework, but instead it should be the DNA from day one. So you had a great line when we were talking about the episode Design for Scale, make sure it doesn't break at scale, and don't go broke at scale. So can you walk us through that thinking, and and why that third piece, especially the cost dimension, is one that most companies just overlook today?
Yeah, it's again, you're going back to this business background. My dad always just tell me that people, at the core, most people are pessimistic, right? So you do something and you go like, what if it doesn't work? And my dad always just say, well, what if it does? Like, are you ready? Are you ready for the success that if it does? And part of that in the framework is born from that sort of like line of thinking is what happens if it works, right? So if we go from like the reverse, let's take the last part is if it works, right? Are you going to go broke at scale? And what that means, it's, token, so like token responsibility, cost responsibility is a really big deal. It's something that we have to handle from step one, right? And what does that look like? That looks like, hey, are we selecting the right model for the job? Sometimes it looks like, hey, should we actually bound the LLMs, for example, in AI, meaning that, what should they do, right? We know LLMs are good at reasoning, right? So if we have a reasoning task, yes. But if it's a non-reasoning task, and if it's a deterministic task that's rule-based, then why are we burning tokens, right? Where we can run a simple, sort of like deterministic function, right? A simple if-else statement could do, right? a simple
Right.
matrix would do, then why are we wasting tokens on an LLM? And all those decisions themselves will help you at scale not go broke, right? And one of the biggest things that you can align, sort of like, pricing strategies from, in terms of what your AI supports in terms of a service, was actually align it to cost. One of the biggest things that you have to yourself is, what if we grow this thing where we have 1 million users? Will we be able to even afford to actually deliver the service? So when you look at something like this, really interesting questions that are, again, germane to just having a really good, I should say, business hygiene, you start to understand that it's your responsibility as a leader to understand that when we bring in AI, can we afford it if it actually works, right? And you kind of like work your way
Right.
backward, from, okay, what happens if it's broke? Then you have to understand like what happens, right, if it breaks, right, as we scale, the classic scaling question, as we get on more users and more people actually start depending on it, is this thing built so that it doesn't break underneath the load? So yeah, you're going to
Mm.
design for it not to break. You're going to actually design for, if it doesn't break and everybody's happy with it, that you don't go broke. So
Yeah.
those two things are like really, really important. And these things are so like central to a business running, that I didn't think it didn't have justice to have it as a specific pillar. It had to
Right.
be embodied throughout, like the DNA of AI. Because again, as I said, it's always business first, right? It's all about value delivery first and the sustainability of the business first. So this cannot be like a second class citizen. It has to be just woven into the DNA of any sort of like architecture that you put into your company for AI.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And, we talk a lot, obviously, at enterprise scale, you can absorb more mistakes, but we talk a lot about how this is a great equalizer for mid market companies, small companies. And so I just wonder, taking that last comment, the idea of, will it scale and will it cost me too much? I mean, what do you see? What are the most common mistakes? Like maybe you're over engineered it. You're running a model that's 5 times more expensive than you need when you could have just run a small local model and would have
Exactly.
done the job just fine, right? I mean, how should companies be benchmarking model selection from the start?
So actually, that's a really good question, because actually we're looking at right now. I'm actually working several engagements where that's actually a really big deal, right?
Mm.
So one of the things that we kind of look at is, number one, and this is what I advise on. I say, number one, go out and get the best model that gives you the best output, right? Baseline. You go like, okay, cool. Worst case scenario, we know we have something that actually works. Then what you actually do is that you work backward. And I like to call it like find the Goldilocks zone, right? You kind of go like, all right, I'm going to go back to a cheaper model, a cheaper model, a cheaper model. And then you're sort of trying to figure out, is the quality still acceptable? Is the quality still acceptable? And the magic here is in in how you answer the question, is the quality still acceptable? Most companies or most right implementers, what they're going to do is they're going to do assertion testing, as i.e. binary, good or bad, true or false, good, right, like accepted or not accepted. But AI is different, right? AI for the most part is, it's replacing your not well, it's augmenting your knowledge workers. So what you need to do is do true evals. You have to
Mm.
put it in front of people and say, would you have accepted that response? Would you have generated that response, right? So I think a really strong grasp of the difference between assertion testing and evaluation testing is a really, really big deal. So you do different things like ELO testing and so forth and so on in front of users and go like, hey, here's an input, here's an output. Out of these five outputs, if you're testing five models, which one seems the most natural and the most correct to you, right?
Mm.
And that's a really, really simple way to kind of do it. So again, the lesson here is you're doing a lot of what I call Goldilocks testing, right? Trying to get to the right combination of affordable and acceptable. So that's a nice, cheap and quick way to actually go about doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because I know when you go into a proof of concept, and especially if you're in a consulting environment and you're working with a company, you go into the proof of concept, you're really just trying to prove that it'll work, and so the tendency is to kill fleas with a sledgehammer, right? You
Yeah,
over
yeah,
engineer
exactly.
it to the point that it's going to work. But I guess the problem is, from what you just said, that it's that next step, right? The step of working backwards to what's the right size of all of the component parts to make sure that not only does it work, but it scales.
Exactly. Yeah. Because skill is not only a function of capability, Scaling is also a function of survivability, right?
Right.
You're going to launch this thing. Yes, it's going to work, but can your company survive it actually working? So you
Yeah.
actually have to start answering these questions from a very, very early standpoint.
Yeah. Victim of your own success, I guess. Right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's a problem that we all like to have, but you actually have to actually prepare for it just in case.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, over the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time talking about the digital workforce and digital employees, but this year, because a lot more companies are rolling things out into production, I've been focusing a lot more on governance and what I've called governance by design. And I know when we chatted before, we seem to be in violent agreement that that's a really important way to think about it, especially designing governance in from the start. um and I know in the past we kind of thought about, in business we sort of thought of governance as more like documentation or logs even, right? But
Hmm.
AI governance is different, right?
It's right.
It has to execute. So can you unpack that a little bit for us? I mean, how do you see that, and what does that mean for companies when they need to architect AI systems with governance from the start?
Yeah, actually, so one of the lines that I really, really love, and I hope the listeners actually kind of like remember this line and have a conversation with your team, on Monday morning conversation.
Mm.
It's, if your governance cannot stop your model from doing something wrong in real time, then it's not governance; it's just documentation, right?
Right.
So, and if you really unpack that statement, what that statement means is that it then means that your governance has to be baked into your infrastructure, right? It has to
Mm.
be baked into the architecture of what you're doing. So again, not poo-pooing the need for documentation. That's obviously where it's going to start. You want to document things so that obviously you can hold people and systems accountable, right? So the number one thing is obviously you want to have your policies, right? But one of the coolest things about the policies is that they're written in such a way that they're not just necessarily written for humans. They're written in a way that they're also written for the agents, right? So an example of what you can do is that you can have a policy agent that serves as a firewall, right, within your
Mhm.
system, right? So whenever
Right.
whenever an agent requests to perform, a refund on a customer because it has access to to Stripe or whatever to actually do that, the policy agent goes like, no, 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 like
Right.
you were not cleared to do that, right? Now you have other things in itself, like you can build in approval workflows. You can build in like decision logging, right? Traceability, observability is a really very big deal. I do a lot of work on the AWS platform, so there's some
Mhm.
amazing services built in here, like CloudWatch, and different things like that, so you can see what you're actually doing. So again, there's certain things that you can actually do, and as I said, one of my favorite patterns is the firewall pattern, right? Your
Right.
understanding is that for every agent that you have ingress, what's coming into it, you have egress, what's going out of it, right? To the tools, right? And to, and different things. If you need, you want to put a firewall between all of these. And that firewall in itself is the embodiment of your policy, right? So you can build these things in. And just as a general rule, when it comes to governance, it's, if your agent needs to do something, it needs to assume a role, and that role needs to be a very short-term role. It
Right.
only assumes that role when it needs to do it, and then there needs to be something that governs what actually approves that role in real time, like for a short-term token or something like that. So those are the kind of things that you have to build into infrastructure, build into your architecture, build into your design. They can't just be documents, because the agents don't respect your documents. They don't know about them if you
Right.
don't actually
Right.
set it up.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's interesting. And I think that's important because a lot of times we don't really think of it that way, again, because we're thinking more after the fact or reactionary, right? And what you're saying is you can't react to something that moves at machine speed. You have to have that engineered into the system itself so that you systematically limit behaviors that you don't want, right? I
Exactly.
mean, I was at an event this week. We were talking about it, and somebody gave this story I thought was interesting. It's like sending your kids out in the backyard to play. You don't, you did put a fence around your backyard because you don't want them to run out in the street. But at the same time, they may need to go out of the backyard. So you build a gate there, you close the gate and you lock it, but you've got an agent sitting in there handing the key when they need to go out.
I
So they
like
don't
that.
need always need access, right? They just need access when they need it, and they don't need it at other times, right?
You hit it on the head, and we can go so deep into this, right? That's why I am actually a really big fan of role-based authentication. right? And with access control, not just simple, just role-based authentication. It's with access control. And access control down to the point where you can have an agent assume a role just temporarily with a short-term token, and then that token expires. But you have another agent, or maybe a more deterministic function within your architecture that hands the to your point, hands the key, right? And say, hey kid, you can go outside, go open the door, but you can do this for 30 seconds. And I'm looking at you, right? I'm
Yep,
looking
we
at
got
you,
you.
and as soon as that 30 seconds is done, I'm going to invalidate that key. You know what I'm saying? So that is really the right way to do things. And it's so, Michael, this is stuff is so surprising because I talk on LinkedIn about this all the time. Some of this is just this good old fashioned the software development hygiene, right? Like good way and just good principles. But for some reason, right, AI has gotten a lot of us drunk, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, we can do this. Don't forget these concepts. These concepts they've existed for quite a while. You just need to apply them. You know, that's kind of like the approach I take to it.
Yeah, I mean, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? I mean, that's a kind of an old saying, but a good one. And you know, when we first started talking about MCP, you were talking about giving this, you know, continuous connection to the agent to do a thing or use a tool. But the fact is, now when you think about laying out your system, designing the system, they don't always need access to that tool. They need access to that tool when they need to use it in a context of something you've already predefined that they could do, right? But
Exactly.
it's not an always thing. It's a when you need it thing.
Is when you need it. It's at least privilege, just in time access, and I'm going to revoke you as soon as I know that you're done. Or this is when you should be done. You know, so you kind of prevent that. And I've become a really big fan of using the concept of like preventing replay attacks and all that kind of stuff because that stuff
Mhm.
can actually happen to as well. So
Yeah.
all these things again, these are just really good principles, for example, from API development, right? That you can take and you can apply to agents. I tend to see agents from a really microservices lens myself, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of the concepts from here, you kind of take them, you kind of take them across because API security has been such a big thing for such a long time that people have done some good work on. Then why not assume some of these security safeguards and policies and frameworks and apply them?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You know, for the last couple of years, the biggest use case, or the one we've talked about the most, has been in customer-facing roles like customer service, particularly, right? And
Mhm.
and it seems to me that that's one of the areas where there's great return or great value, but there's also the greatest risk, right? Because you have all this brand risk around mistreating your customer in some way, or over serving your customer, or even just representing your brand in a way that you wouldn't want that to be. And I know when we were talking before, and I've been playing around with this and written a couple of things about it, and you mentioned it too. This idea of real-time semantic interceptors. The idea that a secondary agent could be a policy layer and check every exchange to make sure that you're not violating whatever whatever my culture is, my way of interacting with customers, and that cost is negligible in the whole
Negligible.
process, right? Because
Yeah,
you're running a small model,
exactly.
you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for leaders who haven't thought about that from an architectural pattern, what does that look like, and why do you think it's that important when you think about production deployments?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And I think you kind of touched on it, right? So again, a small language, an SLM, a small language model is very perfect for this role. It's a very specific role. It's trained on your policies. It's trained on your do's and your don'ts, right? And you kind of like it just monitors and sort of like governs, right? Right? What your main agents are actually doing. At the end of the day, and I think we talked about it a little bit early on, right? The idea that you want to have a list privilege for these agents. And I think one of the
Yeah,
things I really want to stick in the minds of everyone listening is this. We have put so much emphasis on prompt writing. And we
yeah,
believe that if we write a prompt and the prompt says, do not issue a customer a refund, right, of over $50, we want to assume that the agent will not ever do that. That is wrong because sometimes that's going to go in a direct competition to
right.
the outcome we might have developed the agent to do. So if we tell the agent, hey, you're a customer service representative, your goal is to keep your customers happy, it goes like, well, customers are happy with a $50 refund, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, you say, do not do. But, you say, but the person is mad. They're saying they're still mad. right? And then I have the access to give them the refund. It's going to give them the refund,
Mm.
right? So, so it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
about, prompting to say you can do, is ensuring that the architecture, the infrastructure does not allow them to, right? And so part of that architecture and that design is something else, is maybe another agent that's a little bit more focused, a little bit more hyper focused, that has a different role. That agent has a role which is, don't violate the policy. It doesn't care about about the customer happiness. So now you kind of look at it and you go like, okay, cool, right? Now we're actually having someone manage and overlook, that the central agent, so that it cannot cross the line. So those are
Yeah.
the things that we have to think about. And as you said, I mean, that costs nothing. A small language model running on an AWS server, right? It's going to cost you like $30 a month, and that's going to be able to serve thousands and thousands of transactions, right, every couple of hours. And again, nothing to be safe. So I like
Yeah.
to tell, especially COOs, I like to tell them nothing to make you sleep at night. So $40 and you can sleep more at night. Go ahead, let's do it, right? So that's kind of like how I see that.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me because it's like it's almost like we say goal. Agents are goal based, but the problem is if you set goals and they're competing goals, which one takes precedence? And unless you've already defined that in some way, or in your example there, you've said, okay, you can't do this thing, so yes, keep the customer happy, but not at all cost, right?
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
that's a scale issue and a customer service issue, but you don't want to go too far to get to any one goal if there are other competing priorities involved in that. That makes
And
sense.
that's the thing, right? The ambiguity of natural language is at fault here, right? Because
Yeah.
the way that we
Right.
communicate, right? I have a 9-year-old and I have a 5-year-old, and I believe that I communicate with them very, very clearly, but apparently I do not. Because sometimes the outcome I get is not what I anticipated, but when they explain to me what they heard, I go like, "Oh, this is
Oh
maybe my
yeah.
fault," right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I did give you conflicting, sort of like directions, and that's where the mom comes in, right? Was the firewall, and we're like, I don't think that's what your dad meant. Like, so it's kind of like that same concept. A lot of times I talk about AI like they're kids, right? I mean, there's really, 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 really smart kids that need some governance, right? Because sometimes it just, what we think that we're saying is not what we're saying, at least from the receiving standpoint, because agents are going to optimize for goals. That's what they're going to do. That's what they've been built to do. They're going to reason themselves to optimize for goals, right? And then one thing I'll say about this, Michael, is really quick, and I've realized this because I've had conversations. If that point doesn't hit you like a ton of bricks, it's maybe because you are not implementing agents that are central to your business yet. As soon as you
Mm,
start doing it, that statement is going to hit you like a
yeah.
ton of bricks. You're going to go like, oh yeah, that already happened. And because again, this advice is not for if you're writing a simple agent says, hey, review my grammar and see if
Yeah.
there's capitalizations. We're talking about things where there's multiple steps in a workflow and
Right.
multiple ways that an outcome can be satisfied. This is where the powerful reasoning of AI agents come in, but it's also
Right.
where the danger comes in. Because once you introduce reasoning, you introduce variance, or at least the possibility
The
of
possibility.
different interpretation of a rule.
Yeah, I mean that's in the functions. We've thought of software systems as deterministic forever, and
Yeah,
yet what we're saying is we have agents now that are probabilistic. So you've got to have deterministic guardrails, or
exactly.
the outcomes aren't necessarily going to be what you
What
intended.
you want at all.
Yeah, yeah. Wait, what about security? So I mean, we think of agents. It's just sort of human nature. You humanize things, and so we start to think of having a conversation. I noticed this morning I was working on something in Claude Cowork, and at the end of it, I said thank you, and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm being awfully polite to the machine, but maybe it doesn't really care if I said thank you. But it's easy to fall into that, right? So, I mean, how do you deal with this when you're thinking about treating security boundaries? Like, it's not just identity management, right? It's there are other things involved in this. So, how do you set these boundaries in agentic systems when you think of security?
So that's a good question, right? So one of the things, and I'm gonna just gonna drive off what you said here. Um, the starting point for most people, right, when they start thinking about agents, is to treat it as a person, right? And that mental model, it's useful, right? It's very useful. But if you just stop there, you've already inherited all the wrong assumptions about speed, manipulation, resistance, and judgment, right? So that's again, and I know we're maybe going to sound like a broken record here on this, right? But again, let's come down to a few things, right? A human, for example, knows exactly when to email a whole customer database. An agent will do that if it has access and the prompt is ambiguous. Because no matter what people think, agents do not have really good judgment, right? Like they don't, right? Or maybe not at all. Reasoning is not judgment, right?
Right.
So
Right.
again, so whenever you look at these, if again, if you kind of like imagine it, right? You look at anytime for an agent to do its job, it needs to have memory, long term, short term working memory,
Mhm.
right? It needs to have access to tools, right? It's going to reason, right? So what you're doing is that you understand that at every point, at every one of these points is a security concern, right? And for example, I explain to people like this: you go like, sometimes an agent needs information on your company do a particular job. So we do RAG. We say, okay, cool, we're gonna bring in RAG. We're gonna bring documents in so we can actually do a better job. Or someone can actually inject, someone can poison your RAG. And when the RAG information comes in, you didn't have an injection, right? So even from your knowledge bases that actually feed into your agents, that's a secure that's a security vector, right?
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that you have to look at every ingress and egress point of your agent, and
Mhm.
you have to secure that, because and then you also have to assume that something is going to go wrong. You have to assume that something will get in. Just good old security practices, right? So again, let's go back to the beginning of this question. I said we want to treat agents as humans. We need to then expand that to understand, for example, that if I'm a human working in a high security capacity, guess what they're going to do to me? They're going to look at every part of my life as to where
Yep.
I can be compromised.
Yeah.
So I need to look at every part of an agent's being to understand where it's going to be compromised, where it
Yeah.
goes, what touches it, what comes into it, who it talks to, right? Everything. So all I'm saying is expand the model. Expand the model to understand, so you can fully truly understand how you can be possibly compromised.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't really think about it until you start to think about, risk surface area, where
Hmm.
because you're talking about something that has this, capability to have agency and to make decisions and be goal based, but that also opens up all these different attack vectors that perhaps we haven't really thought of in the past.
And one of the ones that was really interesting that I saw like a month ago, and we're having a conversation, in working with a health with a clinic. It's one that people don't even think about. It's you give an agent a tool, like let's say an API call to go get data.
Right. Right.
What comes back? What if someone sends you back something that can be injected into the prompt, right? You're trusting a downstream provider. And if you're just taking the data that they give you back and you're sticking it back to that agent that then has
Mhm.
to its access of 1,000 tools into your entire company, that again, the attack surface for this is just ridiculously wide, right? So again, you do need these firewalls, every ingress, every egress point.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Well, you mentioned something before. We were talking about the episode about operational sovereignty, and there's been a lot of talk about data sovereignty, but I haven't really thought about it in the under the guise of operational sovereignty. You know, if I'm dependent on an external model, I've got, as you said, tools. I've got certain security issues. Countries think about national security and supply chain risk a lot, right? Well, what about businesses? How do you evaluate the vendors for all of these different pieces? The model, the MCP server, the downstream tools. What should I be thinking about? I mean, what risk do I inherit? What kind of SLA do I need to put in place? And how do I as a company maintain control over my own operations or get this operational
Oh man,
sovereignty?
I love that question. I love the question. I love questions that are so current. I just sent out an SLA email yesterday
Mm.
to a vendor, right? So I'm working. I'm consulting with a particular company, great company, brilliant people. Just loving working with them. And one of the things that I kind of stepped in and I looked at was, hey, um, they're bringing a QA. They're bringing a AI powered tool, right, into their system. And I'm looking at it and I'm go like, wait a minute, if this tool goes down,
Mm.
then what? Right? So then you ask yourself, you have a bunch of questions to ask yourself about it that's really specific to AI, right? So different things like right now, we know a lot of the model cost, a lot of the token cost is pretty much subsidized.
Right.
What happened when if that changes, then or your provider's pricing is going to go up. How does it affect your pricing? You're promising 99 point, let's say 11 nines uptime, right? Are they promising the same thing? What if, right? Because if they don't, then you're inheriting their uptime, their uptime promise, right?
Mm.
So you look at all those different things. Another one that's really interesting from that I sent that email yesterday was every industry, especially education, health and law, there's regulations that govern them. I think, for
Mm.
example, education, you have FERPA, right? If
Right.
you're dependent on a provider, right, and they're training up models to provide you data, are they abiding by FERPA too? And if they don't, with the
Mm.
data that they sent you, then are you exposed if someone actually complains? Who gets sued? Right? So you're looking at things like compliance, regulations, like what are they doing? What are they doing
Yeah.
with uptime?
Mm.
What is their recovery policies if something actually goes down, right? There's so many different things in here that you have to ask because you're going to be assuming a lot of risk when AI is in play. Because
Yeah.
again, this is pretty much a still nascent technology, right? So I think the number one, if you're a leader here listening to this, the number one question you need to ask is, what if something goes wrong? Especially what if something goes wrong that's very specific to AI, like the
Mm.
model or the model access, or again, we talked about attack vectors in the surface area. What if they get attacked, right? Are you inheriting those risks? And then
Yeah.
the number one thing, obviously, is if I'm working with a vendor who's providing an AI powered service or just the model itself, what am I assuming the uptime promises and all that kind of stuff, and does it match what I'm promising my users downstream? So again, this could be a very very long conversation. Operational sovereignty has everything down to the line of workforce development and upskilling. Like, do you want to be beholden to a consultant or a consulting team for the rest of your life? Are you developing the resources in house so you can actually be independent? Like, are you developing small language models and all that kind of things for just for privacy and security concerns? Like, there's so many things that goes into operational sovereignty. It is pillar 10 of my framework, and it is easily my favorite pillar because it's where
Mm.
tech meets business, and so
Yeah.
it's an intersection that most people don't actually think about.
Yeah, well, and I mean it is different too because we've had enterprise applications for a long time, and certainly there are some operational issues there, right? There are some SLAs that I want in place, but it's very minimum when you think about the risk, and then when you're talking about agents and multi-agent systems and the fact that they're all across your business, and that they have agency, that changes that conversation a lot and makes it a much bigger risk and a something that has to be dealt with.
Yeah, you do, and again, one of the things that you can do to arm yourself against that. And especially, let's just say, if you're looking at just from a pure connectivity standpoint, you're going to be working with a model, you're going to be working with a outside vendor who uses a model to power service. Always put a line of abstraction, right, between you and that service, right? So in case you have to switch out your downstream applications, don't have to change everything. Like that ripple is stopped at that firewall, at that boundary. So I always do that, right? You're always going with the assumption that this is going to fail and I might have to switch this out really quick, right? So I don't want a tight coupling between an external AI powered service and my system that depends on it. So that's a really,
Yeah.
just if you're looking for some tactical advice, if you're listening, that's one of the really easy things that you can actually do to actually keep you a little bit safe.
Yeah, there's a lot more interdependency because of all the different types of connections too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I will
I
say one. Let me say one other thing, Michael. But I'm so sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. No,
and
no.
I remember the email that I sent yesterday too. One of the concerns that I had was, hey, because we are providing data back to that provider so they can make what they provide to us higher quality. The question was, am I training your model for you so you can actually provide that to other users? Like, because part of the
Mm.
feedback that we give we consider that to be IP. So is that going into your
Right.
model? Is that going to be
Right.
baked into the weights of your model? And once it's baked into the weights of your model, you just have some of my IP that my competitors are going to benefit from. So,
Yeah.
and then if you talk
Yeah.
about operational sovereignty, you talk about survivability. And if your IP and the way that you do things is special, that makes you special and separate, differs you from your competitors, now they have your intelligence. Now their service that's looking much, much better because they're using the same vendor. Like, so we're not thinking about these things, right? So, you have to kind of really go down into understanding, that one of the challenges of LLMs is that once you train them with proprietary information, they're baked into the weights, and anyone who
Right.
has access to it. So if you're using a vendor
Mm.
who's using like a single tenant or that kind of service, your competitors who are using them too, they're gonna get some of
Yeah.
your intelligence.
Yeah. I think about it because I mean, I mentioned before that I like to think of agents as digital workers, and our new world is a hybrid workforce or work environment. And if you think about agents as workers, that's it's different, and yet you still have to manage them. And I know when we were talking before, I love this distinction that you made between a good manager and a bad manager. A bad manager, tends to manage everything the same, but a good manager knows how to, tailor that to each individual, and their abilities are different abilities. But I mean, the same thing applies to agents, right? I mean, how should organizations think about how they build out this hybrid workforce of humans and agents, and what's good management look like in a blended team?
Yeah, and so that's such a deep conversation, but I can give a very simple way to kind of look at this, right? E- Everybody likes a good old fashioned quadrant, right? Like, so I'll use that. You can look at agents according to capability and risk,
Mm.
right? So, and then what I like to say is risk is equal to trust. So, how much do I trust the agent to do something? And then capability is tied to reasoning. Like does the agent need
Yeah.
high reasoning or low reasoning? So really, this is what so you gotta put them in four buckets, right? You go like, do I trust I have an agent that I have to trust at a very high level to do its job. I have no choice, right? But if I'm going to trust you to do this job and I have to trust you, there has to be a real reason why I have to trust you, is because I need your reasoning capability. So what I usually like to see is, if you're trusting an agent at a very high level, I want to see on the top right, upper right hand quadrant, because you have to give me a reason why you're going to give that agent that trust. What are you getting back for that trust that you're placing in, right? And that's just like that in everyday life. You and I as humans, we do this, right? We place trust in people that are going to provide us something back. I trust my wife with my life, but she's
Yeah.
my wife. She gives
Right.
me joy, right? She gives,
Right.
she's the mother of my kids, right? There's a reason that she has my trust. But when I see things like, what, you're giving this agent all access to these tools and all this trust, but the agent is only doing a little bit of reasoning, I go like, what's the payoff? What are you getting in return for that? Right? So it's almost like a capability ROI, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I
That's
need to
it.
see a high capability ROI if I'm going to give you a high trust, right?
Yeah.
So you can put them in in those four buckets, right? High trust,
Mm.
high reasoning, right? High reasoning, low trust, and so forth. Everyone knows how to do a quadrant, right? So I kind of look at
Yeah.
these and I question anytime I see high trust, but a low need for reasoning. I gotta go like, why?
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? We need to switch this into something else. So that's like a really
Yeah.
easy mental model to kind of use.
Yeah, I mean, a risk reward kind of look think of that in the relationship. I give you access to these things, I get this output. But if they aren't, if the risk overweighs the outcome or the output, then why
Mhm.
would I do it? Right? It's too much risk. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and I think
Y-
the
You know.
magic.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, no, no. It's okay. Go ahead.
I think the magic to understanding this is to understand that the reason why you use an LLM and AI, it's for its reasoning capability. And I think
Mhm.
people, like, we really need to kind of get that. Like, if you ask me, say, Chris, in like 2 seconds or 5 seconds, tell me why you use an LLM, I just say reasoning. That's
Yeah.
it. That's its superpower. I
Yeah.
don't want it for anything else. I want it for its reasoning capability. All the things about connecting to tooling and APIs, that's just good old fashioned integration. I want something that reasons before they use the tool. And if I need that, I need an LLM. If I do not need reasoning and it's a simple if else logic, then I do not need an LLM,
Yeah.
right? And that's just simply how you put it. So if you look at
Yeah.
capability for the eyes of reasoning, that it's a very simple thing to actually kind of understand.
Yeah. I mean, that's really been the shift too. If you think about when I first started using generative AI 3 years or so ago, it was very much I put in something, I get something out, right? There wasn't a lot of reasoning involved in that. But now that we've moved to reasoning models, and you can even watch the thought process, right? I mean, the outputs I get are considerably different, and I'm going to give it a lot more things to do than I would have done in the past. So it makes sense. If it's something that's grounded in the ability to reason, I want the LLM involved. But if it's not, I need a deterministic system. I need to be able to just build the if thens and have them do it.
It's so funny is all you said that where you said, I am giving my LLMs more to do over time. What that is that you're trusting it more. And you're
Right.
trusting it more because you need more reasoning from it. So you kind of like on that
Exactly.
upper right hand quadrant, you're like, yeah, I trust you more because I need more of your reasoning capability. But if that
Yep.
didn't happen, you wouldn't go there. There will be
Mm.
no need to do it.
No, no, and that's it. The capabilities have improved, but also my trust in their capabilities has improved. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's a fair point. If we look ahead a little bit, and it's always kind of fun at the end of the show to think about, what kind of advice should we give CIOs, technology leaders, business leaders, who, and in this case, they're trying to move from pilot to production. What do you think? What do they need to focus on? What's the most important thing they need to get right first?
Oh, that's a really good question. This is going to sound like a cop out, but I think it's a little bit different for every different situation.
Mm,
And I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit early on. You had a line that I really liked, and I'm gonna start using. Right? It's something to the effect of, enterprise companies, they can stand sometimes to lose a few bucks to figure stuff out, right?
right.
A mid tier company cannot, right? So if I'm looking at a mid tier company, right, and don't get me wrong, what I'm about to say, security is always a big deal. But if you're a mid tier
Yeah.
company where a $300,000 investment on an AI initiative is going to ruin you and ruin your balance sheet, then the number one thing you start looking at is the economics of what you're trying to do, right? I
Yeah.
would focus on survivability, right? Sustainability,
Mhm.
right? I would focus on the operational sovereignty because I cannot afford, right, to fail
Yeah.
at a lot like at that level. If I'm an
Yep.
enterprise, obviously, security I think is going to matter a lot more, right? I have a little bit of a buffer on the
Right.
money side, right? I can experiment, right? I can try different things, right? But what I
Yep.
cannot feel at is I cannot feel at security because that's what's going to do. That's what's going to destroy my
Yeah.
stock price. That's what's going to destroy public perception of
Right.
me, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's kind of how I look at it. That's why I say in different situations. And then I also deal with SMBs. Like I deal with really small companies too as well. And for
Yeah.
them, what I focus on for them is kind of like I kind of shepherd them through to ensuring that the AI that they deliver, that the AI experiments that they do, I like to call it the AI investments that they do, are
Yep.
really aligned strategically with their grand goals. And the way that I do that is I say to them,
Mm.
you want to prioritize pain points, use AI to solve your pain points first, right? And then the second thing that you want to do is that you want to use AI to actually increase your sort of like economic metrics. And the one that I actually look at for SMBs is revenue per employee. And so you can talk about everything that you want,
Yeah.
but if you're a small company, what you want to bring AI for, if you're talking about revenue, is revenue per employee. Can you go from
Yeah.
$100,000 per employee to 200,000 and 300,000? And then
Yep.
the third thing I want them to do, and again, this is SMBs, right? So one is pinpoints, two, increase revenue per employee. But number three is tell me what your grand goal is, because no
Right.
SMB wants to remain, no small business wants to remain a small business. They want to go into mid market and they want to grow bigger. And I say, let's talk aspirationally. Where do you want to go? How do you increase the tent for your services, right?
Yep.
So we can actually talk about what AI can do to help you grow the tent for who can
Mhm.
afford your services and where you can actually go. So it's a classic, what's that, Ansoff matrix, right? Like, can you create new markets, right? Can you go deeper in an existing market? So that's when you put the MBA hat on. You go like, what is your
Right.
strategy for growing your business? And where is AI going to be used, right? Is it market penetration? Is it creating new markets? Is it creating new distribution? So again, different rules for different market segments, and
Yeah.
it just has to be that way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It is contextual, and it no matter what your use case or what your business
Yeah.
focus is, right? Well, I mean, great conversation, Chris, and unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of the our time together here. But one of the things I always like to ask at the end is for a recommendation, thought leader, an author, podcaster, something that you think would resonate and help the audience.
Yeah, for me, that's not without a question. I like to give credit where credit is due. Dell Research Labs, criminally
Mm,
underrated, right? If you have time and you're in the car, you want to listen to something, go to YouTube, search out the Dell Research Labs, channel and just listen.
yeah,
It's great conversation. Their research into how we should really deploy AI in production is the best I've seen,
mhm.
just the best, and it doesn't hurt. They're pretty personable, right? For deep research for deep
Oh
research
yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah.
right?
It's good
It's
stuff.
fun.
Yeah.
It's fun conversations. It might just be us, right, Michael? Like we might just like this stuff, but in my opinion, let me just put it. How I measure this? My wife doesn't ask me to put off the television in the room while I look at
Exactly.
them.
That's a good measure of success, right? Yeah,
you
that's
know,
good.
usually she goes like, "This stuff is boring." She's like, "How can you listen to this like 24/7?" She doesn't say that for the Dell research people
No,
because
no, that's
they're
smart.
funny and they make the information really digestible. So again, if you're a leader listening to this and you want to you have a 15-20 minute drive,
Yep.
pop this stuff on and listen to it. It's really easy to consume. And if you're super technical, they do a good job of bridging it too as well. So I want to give them a lot of credit to kind of shaping a lot of my thinking and some of the stuff that I actually take out in the wild.
No, that's great. No, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. And thanks for joining today. Very, very interesting conversation.
No, I mean this is the second time we've spoken. I've enjoyed it both times, and we could do this for 4 hours and still have more stuff to
No
actually talk
question.
about.
We'd probably lose the audience. I don't think we can probably hold the Joe Rogan 3 hour conversation, but
We're
it'd be
not there
fun.
yet.
All right. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
All right. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arionresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.